Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our Wellness for All webinar, when today we'll be looking at this area of autism in the workplace. I think there's little doubt when we think about our wellness charter that actually autism could impact any of the 8 domains within our wellness charter. And we want to do much more at Suez to help people in the workplace and families to learn more about autism. Ahead of next week, which is Autism Awareness Week, are we aware that there's 700,000 adults and children that are autistic in the UK? In putting together this webinar, we've researched different organisations that can provide advice and support around autism, but I enjoyed having a conversation with an organisation called Perfectly Autistic. And they're joining us today to help us understand and see how we can become more autistic friendly within the workplace at Suez. So I'm very pleased to introduce Kelly. Kelly Grainger co-founded Perfectly Autistic with his wife Hester. Kelly and his wife have got 2 children who are autistic, and Kelly himself was diagnosed with Asperger's in 2019 at the age of 44. So thank you for joining us, Kelly. I know that this is going to be an interesting webinar for us, and I've very much enjoyed the conversations with yourself and your wife in the lead up to this webinar.
Thanks, Tracy. And thank you for inviting me to speak today. It's really exciting that an organisation the size of Suez have got autism on the agenda. Hello everybody else, hope you're having a good morning so far. Now, as you can see, I've titled my presentation Making Your Workplace Happier, Healthier and More Productive, because that's exactly what happens when you make your workplace autism friendly. It has a positive impact on everybody. Now, autism is a huge subject with many facets, and I couldn't possibly get to all of them in the time available this morning. But what I hope to deliver is very much an overview with an opportunity for you to ask questions at the end, and also potentially to reach out to me at a later point. Next slide, please. Now, before I begin, I thought it'd be useful to provide a bit of context as to why I'm speaking to you today about autism. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, my journey, and the story of myself and my family. Now, I've worked for roughly 23 years within the corporate world. I've been fortunate to work for some really large global businesses, both in the UK and also abroad. I've held a number of senior sales and marketing roles, leading teams, recruiting staff, and I've worked across a number of different departments as well. And I'd say I've had a pretty successful career, and I'm also autistic. I was actually diagnosed in 2019 at the age of 44, something that I'm incredibly positive about. Prior to my diagnosis, I didn't really have any idea that I might be autistic. In fact, I didn't really know much about autism, and nobody ever mentioned it to me. I guess the way that I just assumed it was how everybody was. Now, autism quite often runs in families, and actually my son and daughter are both diagnosed autistic and also ADHD, and my wife Hester is also ADHD, so we're truly a neurodiverse family. It was actually when we were going through our son's diagnosis process that things started to resonate with me. And I remember one day my wife Hester texted me to say, "Here is some feedback from the psychologist, what do you think?" And I replied to it, "Is this about Hudson, our son, or is this about me?" And that's when the penny dropped, and we decided together that I should pursue a diagnosis to find out for sure if I was autistic or not. And when I received the diagnosis, it was actually there was actually a feeling of relief. It meant that I might be able to answer some of the many questions that I had growing up and into adulthood and then through my working career. Now, the next decision I had to make after the diagnosis was, when should I tell other people about it? When should I tell people, actually, I've been diagnosed as autistic? Or even, should I tell anyone else? Because in my experience, particularly in business, mental health in general, but particularly amongst men, can be seen as a weakness. And honestly, I was worried that would this be the same with autism? You know, if it's not physically visible, then it's not real, right? And it's not taken seriously. So I plucked up the courage and I thought, actually, I will tell people. And the first person I actually decided to tell was my line manager, the director at the company at the time I worked at. And his first reaction was to laugh and say, really? You don't look autistic? And that kind of took me back quite a bit, because it actually took quite a lot for me to pick up the phone and say, this is what's happened. I've had a diagnosis and this is what it means. And later on in the conversation, I tried to kind of explain to him about what my autism was and the traits and the challenges that I felt, and that he may have picked up sometimes I might have come across a little bit blunt, or, you know, maybe sometimes my eye contact wasn't very good, and just kind of lay out some of the traits I had. And he responded with, ha, I just thought you had a stick up your ass. Now, that same afternoon, I knew that he had a meeting with HR to inform them that I told him about my diagnosis. And coincidentally, he called me the very next day to apologize for some of his comments. And it was actually that conversation that led me to realize that the company at the time that I was working for wasn't for me anymore, and I had to make a change. It was also led me to reach out to a number of autism groups online and ask them their experience at work. And unsurprisingly, many of them had negative experiences just like mine. And so this is what inspired me to set up Perfectly Autistic, to not just raise awareness and understanding of autism, but also acceptance of autism. And between myself and my wife, we have lived experience as well as knowledge gained through courses and formal qualifications in autism. So we now work with various organizations, either as advisors to their business on their neurodiversity strategy, or providing training and support through workshops, webinars to their employees. Next slide, please. Now, as I said, autism is a huge topic, lots of things related to it. So what I really would like and hope that you take away today is just a greater understanding of what autism actually is, and maybe more importantly, what autism isn't, and why it's absolutely important that people and workplaces and business really understand that what autism is and the benefits that having autistic or neurodiverse colleagues can really bring to your business. And also that as a business, you know, businesses don't have to learn by themselves. There are lots of partners out there of the organization that you can bring along with you to help really drive that message and really drive home what autism is and the benefits it can provide. Next slide, please. So what is autism? Well, autism is one of a number of conditions that come under the term neurodiversity. Others include things like ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, plus a number of others. And neurodiversity is still a relatively new term that most people may not know about. Now, most people are neurotypical, meaning their brain processes information in the way that society expects it to, whereas autistic brains function and process information differently. Autism is a lifelong developmental disability that affects how a person communicates with and relates to other people, and also how they experience and make sense of the world around them. Autism is known as a spectrum disorder because there's a wide variation in the type and severity of traits that people experience. And autism, or ASD as it's referred to, occurs in all ethnic, racial and economic groups. Now, some autistic individuals will have a diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome. However, Asperger's has been brought under the broader definition of autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. But some people still prefer to use that term if that's what was on their official diagnosis. I guess the key point to understand with autism is that people's brains are different and are going to respond differently to the same things within the workplace. Next slide, please. So here are some kind of autism statistics just for you to think about and consider. As Tracy mentioned earlier on, there are around 700,000 children and adults on the autism spectrum in the UK. That's more than 1 in 100. And just 16% of those adults are in full-time employment. And actually only 10% of autistic adults receive employment support, but 53% of them actually say they want it. They want more support, they need more support, they want to work. And that's why it's essential that employers gain the knowledge and resources to ensure that they're supporting their team, no matter their way of thinking and working. Like autism, most forms of neurodivergence are experienced on a spectrum, as I said earlier. Now, sometimes people think of the word spectrum and imagine a very linear line, which gives the impression that people range from being a little bit autistic at the end to very autistic at the other end. Now, how can you be a little bit autistic? You can't. It's impossible. You're either autistic or you're not. In actual fact, the spectrum, if you can imagine, looks more like a wheel. And that wheel has different segments in it, and each of those segments refer to different traits or different challenges for the individual. And it really refers to the way in which the brain processes information, which in turn will vary very much from individual to individual. And I like to say that once you've met one autistic person, you have met one autistic person. So that's why it's really important not to stereotype individuals based on specific characteristics. For example, not all autistic people are maths geniuses, okay? Some other common myths around autism you might have heard or be aware of. Autistic people lack empathy. Actually, autistic people can be very empathetic, and some can be over empathetic, particularly with things like animals or small children. All autistic people have a special talent. This is not true. Autism can be cured. It cannot be cured. It's a lifelong condition, and only boys can be autistic. Again, another myth, boys and girls can be autistic. It's just picked up more in boys than it is girls, because girls tend to mask more. They tend to hide their autism. And while we've moved forward in our understanding, research that was conducted by O2 on a campaign that I worked on them with found that 81% of those with a condition such as autism feel that there's an opportunity for them to be better supported, both inside and outside the workplace. And I guess a little bit worrying is that 64% of employers in the study still admit to having little or no understanding of the cognitive differences that people may have that can make communicating challenging for them and the situations where they're communicating. And this is mostly due to the topic still really not being discussed as it should be, especially in the workplace. Now, you can understand that many managers also fear saying the wrong thing, so they either shy away from openly communicating on the subject or discussing it at all. And there's a lot of educating still to be done, but there are a few things that businesses can do to ensure that they are reaching all of the employees. And what I would say is that if in doubt, just ask the question. As an autistic person myself, I have no objection to somebody saying, so you're autistic, tell me about that. What are the challenges you face? What can we do to make things a little bit easier for you and really to help you thrive within the workplace? Next slide, please. So many people on the spectrum share some strengths, such as being visual learners or having a good visual memory. And they're often very thorough in their work. They're punctual, rule observant, and many autistic people develop special interests and can hold high levels of expertise in their given topic. But as well as the direct benefits autistic colleagues will bring to your business, as you can see on the slide here, there are other benefits in your business being autism friendly too. So as a business, it demonstrates your commitment to diversity and inclusion. It reduces the stigma around autism and allows the permission to have the conversation. It also opens up the organization to a pool of talent that may otherwise have been overlooked. It also helps reduce mental health absences, which, according to Deloitte, who ran a study, says that it costs the UK economy an estimated £45 billion a year through absences from mental health. And remember that everybody is different. So whilst creating a workplace that supports neurodiversity, and it's particularly important for those employees, the actions and strategies put in place can benefit all employees right across the workplace. Next slide, please. Now, as I said before, no two people with ASD have the same experience or have the same strengths and challenges. But the most common core features of autism or ASD include things like difficulty maintaining eye contact. So while many people with ASD have limited eye contact, it is not true that every person with ASD cannot maintain eye contact. But this is something to take into account both at home with your family or partners or children, but also adults in the workplace. As society places great emphasis on being able to make good eye contact and the link with being successful. Difficulty reading non-verbal cues in office politics. I used to really struggle with office politics when I worked in the corporate world, particularly where I would be told by my line managers that I was expected to raise my own profile within the business, get around, promote myself to be able to get ahead in the company. And to me, this felt too much like bragging, and I wasn't interested in it. I wasn't very good at it. But in numerous review meetings, it was picked up as one of my weaknesses that I didn't promote myself enough internally, and something that would hold me back within the business. But to an autistic person, it doesn't feel comfortable. So we really don't want to engage in that. Sensory sensitivity or altered sensory perception. Now, many autistic people have difficulty processing everyday sensory information, such as light, noise, clothing, or even temperature. And they can be either hypersensitive, which is overreactive, or they can be hyposensitive, which is underreactive to sensory input. And actually, a person's responses to sensory experiences may fluctuate from one day to the next. For example, when a person is particularly anxious, the responses may be much greater. So an example that I gave earlier offline was that my son some days has real problems putting his socks on, and he actually feels physical pain with the socks on his feet. And another day, he will be okay putting socks on. And it really depends on his state of mind that day, how anxious he is, what's coming up, what he's feeling. So it can change day to day. Dealing with change, nice segue. So in any given situation, personally, I need to know what is going on, what is happening, when it's happening, who will be involved, what my role will be, how long it will take, etc. And for me, that's incredibly exhausting, but it's something that I can't stop myself doing. I need to know all of the details, otherwise that creates anxiety and uncertainty for me. And it's something I have to do with everything. So this presentation today, I spent a lot of time thinking through, probably over-analyzing what's going to happen, what's not going to happen, and what I need to do in case, those ifs do come along. Anxiety in social situations. So many companies set as mandatory social events at work, which is great for a lot of people. But these should always, in my view, be voluntary. In my previous corporate life, my roles included hosting and attending many customer events, award ceremonies, etc. I found these to be incredibly exhausting. The small talk, having the same conversation with 20, 30, 40 people on the same night. I used to find that I was wiped for a good 2 days afterwards due to the anxiety of it all. And before I was diagnosed, I had no idea why this was. At one point, I thought, I may be celiac because of the food I'd eaten, and that wiped me out the next day or 2 days later. But having been diagnosed and understanding what my autism is and the traits that I have, I've learned that actually that constant anxiety and being in that constant fight or flight mode, if you looked at it on a level of 1 to 10, I probably operate at a level 8 all the time, expecting something to happen. And when in those social situations, I would always be at that heightened state of kind of alertness. And so once that event is gone, physically and mentally, I would feel exhausted. But again, not all autistic people will share all of these challenges. And I'd re-emphasize the point that once you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. Next slide, please. So what can we do? And here are some common areas where workplace adjustments can be made. Bit of a starting point for discussion. Now, bear in mind that despite the differences in diagnosis, the barriers can be very common. So let's take recruitment. Start at the very beginning when somebody is brought into your business. Is your recruitment process inclusive? Be mindful from the start. Make sure that For instance, the interview process is clearly laid out. Use visuals to show where the office is and who will be interviewing. Include an itinerary so people know how long they'll be interviewed for and by how many different people they're likely to meet. Let them know what notes they can bring if needed, and ask if there's anything specific that they need for the interview. Be clear with your language. Make sure that the interview questions are clear and experience-based and not hypothetical, like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I always used to struggle with that. I have no idea where I'm going to be in 5 years' time. I already know what I'm doing now, where I'm going to be. I really struggle with those types of questions. And for an autistic person, these questions can be impossible to answer. So by asking closed questions where you can talk about relevant skills and experience, it will work much better. If you ask about passions, this is where you may see an autistic person come to life as they talk about their special interests. And don't expect and judge the individual on things like eye contact, as I mentioned before, or lack of eye contact, as this can be incredibly difficult for an autistic person to maintain. It feels uncomfortable when I'm trying to focus on what I'm saying. It's very difficult to then focus on somebody's face at the same time. Psychometric online tests. Now, most businesses use them to measure high potential candidates, either internally or externally. And most of these are renowned for their inaccessibility. And I guess the only provision that we tend to see is providing extra time to complete. But actually, this is only masking the real issues that an autistic person may be facing. Within the work environment itself, for an autistic person, working in a busy, noisy environment, it can be really challenging. So what could you do? You could do things like locating that individual's desk or workspace in an area away from the main flow of traffic in the building or in the office. Provide, for instance, noise cancelling headphones to cut out sounds. This is something that has been successfully implemented by the Bank of America. Lowering lighting levels, providing desk lamps or access to natural light. Strong smells can cause genuine anxiety and stress to an autistic person, but also for others. So making sure that your staff have a place to eat lunch away from where they work will really help. Or if people do want to eat last night's takeaway leftovers, make sure it's done away from other people who don't want to smell it. I used to think, and my wife and I used to joke, that I had smell stress, because if there was something cooking in the kitchen or a particular smell, I would get really anxious, irritated, and sometimes quite angry just on the smell. And post-diagnosis, I now understand why that is. And although, a lot of people have been working from home lately, and we've got the technology to thank for that, they can actually work from home with that technology. It's also brought about some specific challenges. In a survey that was also carried out by O2, it showed that the current remote working conditions are causing 45% of respondents to struggle to maintain focus during virtual meetings, while 44% are plagued by what's known as Zoom fatigue. And I get that as well. The number of Zoom calls that I'm on, it has its toll. And for an autistic person, maintaining that constant eye contact with the screen can be particularly tiring. And so this shows the increasing importance of having the right support in place for all employees in a workplace, not just those that are neurodiverse. In terms of kind of organising planning, both neurodivergent and neurotypical people can experience difficulties in planning and organising their work, and also in prioritising their tasks. So we can help by supporting individuals to organise their work and establish routines, breaking tasks into parts and being clear about the priority of the task given, which one should be handled first, and providing clear written instructions and avoiding corridor conversations about work tasks, because actually that person may go back to the desk and completely forget what was discussed and which order of priority it should be made in. Group meetings can be a source of discomfort or even stress for neurodivergent staff. Providing in advance the agenda, any material to be read for the meetings, being clear about the purpose of the meeting, and sticking to the agenda and times where possible. And this is it's always been a huge bugbear for me that meetings never run on time. Somebody always turns up 10 minutes late, and I make a point of always being in the meeting at least 10 minutes early. Now, that causes its own problem, so that when people turn up on time, they're already 10 minutes late in my head. That's my issue. But it's about being on time. If you say your meeting's at 10, everybody turn up to start the meeting at 10. and ensuring that there are breaks in between meetings. If it's a lengthy meeting, make sure people have the opportunity to take a break, not just a natural break, but just to kind of decompress from the conversation that's been happening. And I guess the key point here is that these neurodiverse approaches are going to benefit all employees, because the bottom line is that everyone is unique. Yeah, everyone is different. And so changing the workplace to better meet different needs and preferences will improve the health and well-being and the happiness and productivity of all of the employees, neurodiverse or not. Next slide, please. Now, as I mentioned at the start, autism is a huge subject, and everybody has their own autism. It affects them in different ways. But I hope I've managed to provide you with some sense of what autism is and potentially what autism is not, and why it's really important to not just understand, but also accept autism, both in the workplace, but also outside of the workplace. And again, feel free to reach out to me outside of this session or connect with me on social media. My details are here. But I'm now going to hand back to Tracy for the question and answer session. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. There's a lot in there to learn. Really interesting, particularly, some of the workplace aspects of that, will be good practice for everybody. So I could see some benefit really from the learning we could take away from this that will be helpful for all our workplace. Got some questions come in, if you're happy to answer some of those, and if anyone's got a question, please do pop those into the question box, and I'll put those to Kelly as well. Okay, let me just have a look. Okay, I mean, clearly if there's anything you don't want to answer, please don't feel that you have to answer. This one, before you were diagnosed with Asperger's, were you masking either consciously or unconsciously, those traits? Yeah,
and that's a good question. I would definitely say I was masking unconsciously, because I wasn't aware that I was autistic. I think it's probably twofold. One is that looking back, it's really interesting now that I've been diagnosed. I can look at specific examples and experiences, particularly when I was a child growing up, where I would mask, but I would also mimic. So I would learn through watching other people and trying to work out, well, how would they say that? What would they do? How would they do this? And so I'd mask through school, through kind of university, through work as well. And I still do that occasionally. I will see somebody say something, or I'll see something on the TV, and I'll make a note of how they phrased it. And I'll keep that in my pocket to think, right, if I'm in that situation, I know what I say and what I don't. So definitely I was masking unconsciously, but looking back now, I can see maybe where it would have been beneficial to me to get an earlier diagnosis, particularly as a child, because I would have definitely made different choices growing up, particularly with things like, what I studied at university, and also the career that I chose. Probably going into a sales career from an autistic person probably isn't the first thing you think of.
When you say that, you sort of took examples from other people, to help express things for yourself, which I think, people do as well. We learn, from each other. But, how does that make you feel now, reflecting back on that, with regards to, being able to just be your authentic self? Because I think that's something that's really important, that people should be able to come to the workplace and be their authentic self.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think since my diagnosis, it probably, and I'm still getting there. This is kind of the next part of the journey for me. It's actually understanding who I am, because I've been masking for so many years. It's almost kind of it's almost kind of built in now. It's kind of what I've learned. So I've learned to behave in certain ways, learned to behave as other people do, and maybe not be the authentic Kelly Grainger. It's kind of I've kind of taken pieces from other people. So I think getting the diagnosis has definitely been a positive for me in saying, right, I now need to find who the real me is. So a bit of relief. I think probably there was a feeling of sadness as well, to think that for 44 years I potentially haven't been myself. And as I say, you know, choices and decisions I made, I would have done a lot differently. And it kind of makes me, it does make me reflect on what would have I done differently and what would have been more positive in the 44 years before I got diagnosed. So almost, it's almost like I've got a second chance, but it's quite late on, you know, 44 years onwards. So there's a feeling of relief that I now know what I need to do to try and understand, but that element of sadness that if I'd known at a younger age, I could have probably done more and different things with my life.
And is that then helpful for, you know, your parenting of your own children, and how the decisions that you're helping them make with regards to, you know, their education and futures?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, for me, getting the diagnosis was the two reasons. One was that I just wanted to know, was I autistic? Because I'd always felt that I would think differently, or, you know, people would say to me at work, oh, you were quite blunt in that situation. I'd sit there thinking, no, I'm pretty sure I wasn't. So I needed to kind of understand, and if getting a diagnosis, and if it was a positive diagnosis, enabled me to find something that could answer a lot of those questions, I wanted to do that. But also the second part was I wanted to go through the diagnosis process to almost show my children that it was okay to be autistic, and that actually there was someone that they could talk to and say, you know, what was it like for you as a child? What did you do? And I could almost use my experience to help them navigate, you know, being autistic. And actually, we call ourselves the A team, which is quite nice. So they'll come to me and I'll talk to them and say, look, I understand how you feel. I understand that emotion you showed, maybe you had no control over it. I get where you're coming from. And I think that really just helps them to know that I'm also autistic, and that I've done okay in life, and that I can help them as they get older.
There's a question here around, you know, from this person saying, you know, when they were younger, they didn't hear or don't know very much about this. And, you know, is it that there are more people who are autistic now, or is it, do you think, that we're just more aware of these things?
Yeah, I think it's the second. I think there aren't more people that are autistic, I wouldn't say. I would say that we are more aware. People understand now what the traits are in an autistic person. We understand better how to diagnose those traits. So I think, you know, if we go back to when I was at school, you know, I'd never heard of autism or an autistic person. I think potentially people who were autistic were classified as something else. And, you know, from a, you know, a sad point of view, those people probably weren't supported how they should have been or how they might be supported today. So I think it's just a greater awareness, a greater understanding. And I think society now, if you look at kind of children and teenagers coming through, there's a much greater awareness of mental health in general. My day, mental health was something that you didn't really talk about, and it was seen as a weakness or something that, oh, you know, it's a bit of a stigma. Whereas I think people now are a lot more understanding and kind, I would say.
We've got someone here who's just asking for some advice, really. They feel that they have a friend who may be autistic, and they've tried to raise the subject with them, but, you know, they are resistant to sort of having that conversation. And I don't know, is there any advice that you can give about, you know, how you can best approach that, or indeed whether you actually should, when you think that perhaps a friend or family member is autistic?
Yeah, and it's a tough one, because I know people who I know are autistic, but they will either, they don't want to talk about it, or they will disagree that they are. I think the thing is, it's really down to the individual, the autistic person, whether diagnosed or not, to accept and acknowledge and have that conversation. I think what this person could potentially do is, with their friend, is maybe do a bit of research and understand autism a bit better, so that without, directly, I guess, having that person say, yes, I'm autistic, I'm going to get diagnosed, they know how better to manage that person, or, the traits that person might show from their autism. I think that's probably the best way to approach it. And when that person's ready to have the conversation, then they're there, they're ready, they already have some knowledge about it, and they can be that kind of support mechanism for them. Because it is quite a difficult process going through the diagnosis process if you don't have someone close to you that will support you. I've spoken to quite a lot of people who they've been diagnosed, and in some cases their partners won't accept it and they're not supportive, and that must be such a lonely journey to go through. I was very lucky that obviously I had my children who were diagnosed, but also my wife who's incredibly supportive, because I guess the other piece that's missing is that we talk about autistic people and I guess the challenges and struggles that we have, but I guess the unsung heroes are those parents and partners of autistic people, that actually it can be really challenging for them too. I think the advice is just to be kind, wait for that person to be ready to have that conversation, but just go and do a bit of research yourself so you can support that person the best you can.
And of course, many parents, unless they've been diagnosed themselves, and you say, some of this sort of runs through the family line, are experiencing this themselves for the first time, when it's children, perhaps, if it's, their only child or first child, they've no comparisons to make. And, from experience of family and friends that I've known, before a diagnosis, sometimes their little ones, are just ring-fenced as difficult children in the class. And that's really, really hard for parents, to take on board, to hear. And then, obviously going through the process of getting a diagnosis is extremely difficult in this country, isn't it, to get them to the point where they can get into the system to have that diagnosis, and takes quite a bit of time to get through. I don't know whether you can share some of that experience with us as well.
Yeah, the diagnosis experience, so you go through CAMS, which is the organisation that would do the diagnosis on behalf of the NHS. And I think probably because lack of resources, people, in a lot of places, I know in our area, in our region, the waiting list is very long, and on average it can take 2 years to be seen. And when you're talking about children, particularly, parents will notice certain traits and begin to think about, are they autistic, are they ASD? In primary school is quite a difficult place to navigate if you are autistic, particularly if maybe the school isn't as supportive, or maybe the school don't believe that your child might be autistic, and they just, as you said, think, well, the child's just acting up. Then they won't put the support in place. So there is a 2-year waiting list. I think if you're going down that route, then as a parent, don't wait until the diagnosis. Start to, again, research, understand what that means for your child. There are lots of courses out there that you can attend that are free. Just understanding autism in children, how to be a parent to an autistic child, and then work with the school to say, this is what we believe, we're waiting for a diagnosis. These are the sort of support that we would like you to put in place for our child. Now, the other route you can take, if you can afford it, is you can go down the private route, where you can pay to have a psychologist. It's the same process as CAMS would do, but obviously you're paying and you get it a lot quicker. It really depends where you are in terms of financially set up. But I would always say the sooner you can get a diagnosis, the sooner you can get the support for that child. And that's really important. My children are 9 and 11. So Hudson's at primary school still, he's in year 4. Indy will be going into high school in September. And that creates a whole load of other challenges. It's difficult enough going from primary school into secondary school, but having the knowledge that she is autistic we can then talk to the secondary school and say, here are some of the support things we need you to put in place for that transition.
Mm.
But the process is difficult. It's a lengthy waiting period. And then once you've got the diagnosis, that's it. You know, you don't get diagnosed, go, right, here's a plan for you. It's you've got your diagnosis, off you go, good luck. And I think we were shocked, you know, we've been through the process 3 times now, the 2 children myself. We were shocked at actually how little support or guidance you're given post-diagnosis. You're almost sent on your way. And that was one of the reasons we set up Perfectly Autistic. And, you know, we set up our community on Facebook, which has got about 500 people on it now. And it's a great place. It's a kind place. People are, you know, very helpful. And you've got people on there who've got lots of different knowledge, experience, and they can share their journey. And that's one of the reasons we set this up, because we were aware there was no support or guidance. So people needed a place to go to either say, you know, I think my child is autistic, or my partner or my friend, what do I do? Or, you know, my child has been diagnosed, or I've been diagnosed, what do I do next? Because people are almost stuck and left to, you know, fend for themselves. And it's quite a big thing. Getting an autistic diagnosis is, you know, it's a serious diagnosis.
I suppose, you know, what you're saying there really is as parents, or as you know, individuals for your own situation, you know, follow your instincts really. It sounds like it's something that, you know, you have to have quite a bit of dogmatic determination, perhaps, you know, to press forward with. So I can imagine, you know, your Facebook page and that support through a network of parents and other adults who've been through these situations is really, really valuable.
It's really helpful. I think you're absolutely right. It's you know, as a parent, follow your gut. The number of times we were sort of turned away or told, no, that's not right, or we don't believe you. You really need to trust your instincts and have your child's back, because it is a constant fight. You do need to be proactive, particularly in getting the support that you or your child needs, because you will be told again and again, no, we don't agree, we don't think that needs any support, or we don't think they need any additional needs. And this goes for, you know, autistic children, or any SEN children, because actually it involves more work for that institution to provide help. So really, as you put it, you have to trust your gut. They're your children, you know, do
We've got several people who, and hopefully we might have answered some of this, is saying, you know, that they've actually been waiting up to 2 years for a diagnosis, as you just said there, asking, you know, what can they do to help, where can they go to get some more information. So I think, you know, if we could recommend your Facebook site, and also after the webinar, if we can get Anthony to send out maybe some other links to information with your help, Kelly, that would be really helpful. I've got quite a few people asking, you know, where they can find out more.
Yeah, if they go to the Facebook, if you go on our website, there's a page of resources with links that take you direct to them, and it covers a number of different topics. So if they go to that page, it will take them to other resources that they can look at for autism and neurodiversity. And via the website, they can also connect to the Facebook group as well. So the general resources are on there, and if they want specific questions, that's a great place for this Facebook community, because there, as you said, there will be people on there that have gone through a similar situation and journey, and they can give them some real life solutions or examples.
So honestly, we've got about 4, 5, or maybe even 6 people here. I'm just trying to scroll through the questions as we're talking, saying, well, firstly, you know, as an adult, how can I get a diagnosis? And I know you talked about CAMS, and how did you get your diagnosis? It sounds like we've got some people in the organisation who think they might be autistic and just not quite sure where to go to get started with the process.
So the first thing that I did was I went to my GP and had a conversation, because it's important to get yourself put into the system and it to be recognised by your GP that, look, this is how I'm feeling, this is what I think it might be, I want to be referred to a specialist. And that's where your GP will write a letter, they'll send it off, and and then you'll get a reply back in a couple of weeks saying, you know, we've received the referral, thank you. And that's where I received a letter saying, I think, you know, we've received this, but the waiting might be 2+ years. In some years it's more, it's 3 years, 4 years. And for me, I was fortunate enough to have the money to be able to pay for private diagnosis, because I didn't want to wait 3 years. That was too long for me. So I paid for that. I found a private psychologist who actually works at CAMS during the day, but she also has a private practice outside of her day job. So I approached her. I found out a bit more about what she does, how that looks, how it works with CAMS. I paid for that diagnosis, and I think I got the diagnosis within a couple of weeks. That's how I approached it. But not everybody is in that situation. So the first thing I say is speak to your GP, talk to them about why you think maybe you are autistic or have ASD, see what their feedback is, and ask for a referral. And I think this is, again, one of those situations where trust your gut. And a number of times, you know, the GP might say, oh, you know, I'm not sure. No, push for a referral. You know, you've got a right to be referred to the right specialist. And then you'll have a conversation with that specialist and do some reading up, understand about, okay, what are the traits, what I'm feeling and how I am, does that fit with an ASD diagnosis or not? It might be that, you know, because there are some overlapping in some of the neurodiverse conditions, ADHD, autism, there are some overlapping traits and challenges faced. My children are, you know, both autistic and ADHD. So interesting, they fight against each other. The autism wants them to be organized, perfect, etc., etc. The ADHD kind of doesn't, and they fight against each other. So I would always start with the GP and go from there, and seek out resources. Say on our page we've got resources, or there are many other organizations out there that they can go to for help. And maybe talk to someone that they know, a partner, a loved one, and say, look, this is what I'm thinking. Have you ever noticed anything? What do you think? Because perception's a wonderful thing in this situation. You know, my wife will say, oh, actually, these are some things you do or say. I had no idea.
Several questions as well, and advice on, and you know, whether, you know, individuals should tell their employer. I know you shared some of your experience there, which, you know, wasn't positive, certainly in the first instance. But, you know, would you recommend that people do share their diagnosis with their employer?
I think it's a personal preference. I wouldn't advise someone to share or not to share. I think they need to gauge the first thing being, you know, why are they sharing? Is it because they think they might need some flexibility or more support at work? Is it that they're finding certain parts of their workday challenging and they can link that back to their autism? So I think it's a personal preference. I think they need to understand, you know, do they work for a company that understands what autism is and will be kind and supportive or not? I think it really comes down to what's the objective of it. As I say, I didn't have a particularly positive experience, but I wanted to let my work know, because there were certain traits that I'd been picked up on, and I realized that that was because I was autistic and not because I was just blunt for the sake of it, for example. But I think it's just individual preference. Why are they doing it, and do they think they're going to be supported?
And, you know, got some questions and observations coming through to say that, you know, if you do know and you can help and accommodate people who are not neurodiverse, you know, that can be helpful, because sometimes their behaviours are so abrupt or, you know, verging on inappropriate that, you know, they're getting into a situation where, you know, it's really not working in a positive way at work.
And I think a lot of the time people, it's a bit like at school, you know, the people might think, they won't necessarily think, oh, you know, they're neurodiverse. They'll just think, oh, this employee's really difficult work, or they do this and that's inappropriate. So I guess having the conversation with them and just saying, you know, not necessarily saying, are you neurodiverse, but just saying, look, we've noticed this on occasions. Are you aware of that? Are you aware you're doing that? Do you have any idea why that might be? Because a lot of people who are autistic might not know they're autistic or have another neurodiverse condition. So actually having that conversation might make them start to think about, right, why am I doing that? I'm not doing it on purpose. I'm not being blunt or inappropriate deliberately. I wasn't even aware I was doing it, but thank you for bringing it to my attention. And that's where the conversation might start.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, well, that's the end of our questions, and so many questions come through. I have grouped those together into themes, otherwise we'd have Kelly here for at least another hour or so, I think. So thank you everybody for so much engagement around this subject. There's a lot of interest around this subject. And thank you, Kelly, for sharing your story and your insights and your advice with us today. Just before we close, I'll just have a look at what our next webinar is. Of course, bank holiday next Friday, so our next webinar isn't until the 9th of April, when we'll be introducing you to our new employee assistance program called We Care, that's got some really, really great support in there, including now up to 10 free sessions of counselling for employees with qualified psychologists, 24/7 access to a GP via video and phone. So really enhancing our employee assistance program services there. And it will be at our normal time of 10 o'clock, but not next week. It will be on Friday, the 9th of April. But in the meantime, huge thank you again, Kelly, for your help today in helping us on our neurodiversity journey here at Suez. And thank you everybody for so many great questions and engagement around this subject. Thank you.